I'm Christopher Schoenwald, and welcome to Life as a show intently focused on helping people find their professional pathway by exploring and unearthing the details of jobs from around the world. Before we get into today's episode, I just want to throw this out there. I have a channel over on YouTube, Life as a ... which basically hosts highlights from these audio conversations that I have with these great guests. They typically run 10 to 15 minutes, and they're there to kind of present a different vantage point. You know, for people that aren't into audio, aren't into podcasts, but are still looking for career advice, ideas, help, all that great stuff, send them over to YouTube. Like I said, Life as a ... And if you do get over there, I would love that like or subscribe. I mean, it's the best way to let that algorithm know that the content is worth sharing and should be out there. So anyway, I do thank you for letting me plug this a little bit, but I think it's about time to get into today's episode. Hey, quick question. Jerry Maguire, the film portraying the life of a sports agent. You familiar? You know, Tom Cruise, show me the money, that famous line which kind of became a pop culture phrase back in the 90s. Well, if you know, you know. And if not, don't worry about it. As noted in the movie, it loosely covers the life of an actual sports agent named Leigh Steinberg. And some might rightfully say an iconic figure in the industry. Now, whether that movie piqued your interest in sports agentry or if it was something else, you'd probably want to seek out a trusted voice and hand for tips and advice. Well, enter this episode. Enter Leigh Steinberg. I mean, hey, he's represented the biggest names in the sports universe. In fact, one of his current clients is a guy you might have heard of, Patrick Mahomes, a 3-time Super Bowl winning QB. Well, all this to say, like I insinuated earlier, you are in luck. I have a conversation with this super agent, Leigh, on deck for you today. And in it, we dive into the world of sports agentry. We cover the ins, outs, and hidden aspects, and so much more. And not to mention, for NFL fans, we've got a few cool stories lined up too. Okay, well, I think it's about time to get down to business here, but give me a second to give you a more professional rundown of Leigh, and we can launch into this. Leigh Steinberg, premier sports agent, entrepreneur, best-selling author, and CEO of Leigh Steinberg Sports and Entertainment Holdings, is best known for his work building athletes into standalone brands. He's often credited as the real-life inspiration for the Oscar-winning film Jerry Maguire. And Leigh has represented many of the most successful athletes and coaches in football, basketball, baseball, hockey, boxing, and golf, including the number 1 overall pick in the NFL draft for an unprecedented 8 times, in conjunction with 62 total first-round picks. Yeah, wild, right? And one of his most recent dealings was in 2020, in which he helped to secure the biggest contract in North American sports history at the time for NFL superstar quarterback Patrick Mahomes. That figure being a cool $503 million over 10 years. Now, with an unrivaled history of record-setting contracts, Leigh has secured over $4 billion for his 300-plus pro-athlete clients and directed more than $750 million to various charities around the world. Further, he's also received accommodations from the U.S. Congress, State Senate, State Legislature, as well as U.S. Presidents Ronald Reagan, George H.W. Bush, and Bill Clinton. And over the course of his career, Leigh has been featured on numerous television programs, including 60 Minutes, The Today Show, and many more. And he's even been profiled in a host of magazines, including Business Week, Sports Illustrated, ESPN The Magazine, People, Forbes, Playboy, and GQ. He currently resides in Newport Beach, California. And with all of this noted, I'd like to welcome you to my conversation with Leigh Steinberg. Yeah, so welcome to the program. How are you doing today, Leigh?
Doing very well, thank you.
Yeah, it is an absolute thrill to have you on the program here. You know, as a boyhood fan of many sports clubs, like your name was synonymous with a lot. And in particular, you know, I knew if one of the players that I was, you know, was fan of, if you were representing that player, I knew the club I supported was in for a bit of a fight. And I was just always hoping that things were going to go the right way. So anyway, yeah, your name, it symbolizes a lot, certainly, not only to myself, but millions of others. But in terms of today, though, I do have some questions and I do have a few segments lined up for you. And the first one here is something called Coloring Wikipedia. And it's a segment where I just read off a definition of something related to what the guest does. And then after, I ask for some comments. So, surprise, surprise, I have you down here for sports agent. So, let me just read off the Wikipedia definition of that, and then perhaps you can color that definition for us. Sound okay?
Sure.
Okay. So, sports agent. A sports agent is a legal representative, hence agent, for professional sports figures such as athletes and coaches. They procure and negotiate employment and endorsement contracts for the athlete or coach whom they represent. In addition to contract negotiations, sports agents may also help their clients with financial planning, legal issues, and marketing. They may work closely with financial advisors, lawyers, and marketing professionals on behalf of their clients. There we go. And admittedly, anyone who's familiar with sports or sports agents already knows what that is. But what I'm after here is a more nuanced look at it. Like, what does that mean? What does the profession of sports agency mean to you?
It starts with listening skills and the ability to draw out another human being and cut below the surface responses to get a sense of what their deepest anxieties and fears are and their greatest hopes and dreams. I always feel if you can look at life as the other person looks at it and understand how to tap into what really motivates them, then we can put together a plan. But that plan is about the maturation of young athletes. It's about helping athletes become role models and retrace their roots to the high school, collegiate, and professional community. It's about planning for second career. But it's an inherent understanding that as an athlete, you have a profound forum to try to make it a nicer world, and that can be part of the picture too. So the focus on simply money is ephemeral because what you're really looking for is a way to chart out a career span and a post career span that achieves the athlete's dreams.
Hmm. I like that. It's a different perspective than I think a lot of people would expect, from somebody like yourself or from anyone within the profession. I'm curious about like to what degree did that view of it change along your career? Like when you entered into the profession, is that how you viewed it or it evolved over time?
So there really wasn't a organized field of sports agentry when I started back in 1975. Teams could just hang up the phone and say, we don't deal with agents. And so it evolved over time, but I had a dad who had two core values. One was treasure relationships, especially family. And the second was try to make a meaningful difference in the world and help people and heal pain. So I knew I was looking for something that could impact in a larger way. And I saw early on how athletes were the idol worshipped and the subject of veneration, and that they had the potential really to deal with any societal problem. So that's what kept me in the field of sports representation. And we would look at and profile athletes to try to find those with a social conscience, a bigger heart, and self starters who are ultimately going to be successful in their craft.
No, that's interesting. So it was almost like this strategic approach, at least initially, based off of these values. In researching for this talk, I came across those exact quotes of you, reciting what your father had told you in terms of these values, and the way that you just laid them out there, you can tell that these are things that have stuck with you across, not only your career but your life as well, I would say. So yeah, again, really interesting perspective on that. This also might be an opportune time to learn a little bit more about, some of your current endeavors right now. Of course, you have, your agency, Steinberg Sports and Entertainment, Steinberg Sports Academy, you have speaking engagements, authorship, and a heck of a lot more. But how would you define yourself professionally speaking at the moment?
It's the ability to share with other people and hopefully push certain concepts and values. One of the projects I'm working on right now is health and wellness. There's a biomed revolution taking place in this country that's advancing the parameters of, first of all, anti aging, but second of all, helping athletes achieve higher levels of productivity and energy in critical situations and returning them to health quicker. And there are things like stem cells and hyperbaric oxygen and nanoV and blue, red, and white light, and some new cognitive treatments. So, one of my concerns has always been the specter of athletic concussion. And finally, we have a process called TMS that can bring back a brain. So, I continue to try to push the frontier in terms of what's new and how we can enhance life.
Yeah, yeah. How thrilling that must be. I mean, this is a pattern again in referencing the fact of, researching for this talk that you always seem to be positioned on that edge, on the edge of sports. I mean, that's the industry you're working within. But whether it's, dealing with clients or ways of increasing their values, but also in this sense here, like technology and how that can shape and shift the industry and improve players' lives and for those around them. So yeah, really interesting to hear about that stuff. But I do want to shift into another segment here, a day in the life. And this one's really interesting always for listeners here. And I think to add some further clarity to, the career and what you've been part of, I think the lazy assumption here for a lot of people is that being a sports agent, is filled with glitz and glamour, but probably a more pragmatic look at it all reveals something much different. And I'd be curious to hear what you have to say about that.
So, agentry has three parts. One is recruiting. So, part of your time is spent talking to new prospective clients or their families. Generally, an athlete will have a screener of some sort. So, part of it is that. Contract negotiations is another facet. So, virtually every day has some part of a negotiation with the team or a negotiation on the endorsement front. And then client maintenance, which is taking care of any difficulties that people have visiting with them, spending time with them. Additionally, I'm in the middle of my third book, so I'm writing now. As you mentioned, we were planning another agent academy to train young people for a productive career in sports. Usually in the course of a day, I'll do an interview with either a podcast or a television show, or sometimes I write. Sunday, I wrote a piece for the New York Times on gambling and the unintended consequences of what this is going to mean for sports, which I don't think anybody really focused on. All of a sudden, what was an impregnable wall between professional sports and gambling has now turned into multiple teams in Las Vegas and pro owners owning part of DraftKings and an amazing amount of stimulation of gambling. Well, what are the consequences of that? So it's trying to stay in commentary on the issues that are important day to day.
Yeah, it sounds like you're you're right in the throes of it all by what you just shared there. In terms of, I guess, getting back to the day to day and all those different aspects that you're managing, how active would it be? Like I'm envisioning here where there could be certain days or seasons of work where some of those things are a little bit more intense. Obviously, depending on the approach of a season, I'm sure that's a time where contract negotiations are going on. Obviously, during the season as well. But maybe that point, this is something that comes up quite often on this program, seasons of work. And, maybe you could share a little bit about that too.
Now, this is very seasonal as a occupation, depending on the sports that someone's involved with. So football has a season, and that consists of going to games, supporting the players, being there when they walk out of the locker room, and spending time going in and seeing people. And then it turns in the late fall, winter into recruiting time. And then after that, a sport like football has free agency. So the off season really is when most of the negotiations are taking place, not during the season. And then you get to a month like May or June where very little is happening in the sport like that. But then you have baseball. So it's it is seasonal. It's based on a football season, the draft, what is coming, and there's sort of a routine where it can be completely frenetic and frenzied activity and then laws.
But probably at those points, it's much needed. I'm thinking here as well, as you just laid that out, like the different elements of all that. Like, of course, like the thrill of, being part of some of these sports, spectacles at times, especially if it's a game that's, of significance to either club or to, intense fan interest. But then also too, like the wins and the losses when you're recruiting, the wins and losses of contract negotiations. There's a certain thrill aspect to the work, at least from a layman's perspective. I mean, is that something that that you'd comment on or you'd say was there? And is that something that sort of like always remains? Is that like a big element to the work, would you say?
There are probably three things, if you're representing football players, that are extraordinary. One is if you could sign the first player picked overall in the NFL draft or the Major League Baseball or whatever. So draft day is an inherently exciting event. It's the solution of all this striving. So it's a spectacular night if you've got top drafted players.
Didn't you have like 8 in a row or so? 8 number one draft picks? Yeah. You did all right. You did all right in that area.
8 times. The second, having a significant player or quarterback win in the Super Bowl. So we just had that with Patrick Mahomes. And so that's really exciting because it changes the lives of the people involved in it. It converts them from being a talented athlete to being a household name. The third thing that's really rewarding is having players go into the Hall of Fame at the end of their career. And in baseball, we had players like Pudge Rodriguez. In football, I've had 12 players go in the Hall of Fame. And probably the high point was being selected by Warren Moon to be his presenter and standing there with him after 23 years of a career, gazing out at a huge crowd in Canton, where he became the first African-American quarterback in the modern era to be inducted into the Hall of Fame. So those are magic moments. And then remember, athletes are really expressive. So an athlete will tell you he loves you, an athlete will tell you how much he appreciates things. They're the stereotype of these such tough macho guys. A lot of what I see is the warmer, softer side.
I guess when things are going well. Yeah, I'm sure you see some of the other sides as well come out at different points. That's part and parcel of it as well, I'm sure. But yeah.
What you expect.
Yeah.
In other words, the point is half of the teams are going to lose. Players are going to get injured. You need to be an expert on every form of injury in these sports, especially football, because athletes will tear up every joint in the body, their hip, their knee, their ankle, their shoulder. And you need to understand who the best experts are.
Yeah. There's so many different layers to it all, I guess. Again, I think from a layman's perspective, they might focus in on contract negotiations or maybe just the marketing side of it. But what you've shared already, certainly there's several other layers to, being a sports agent. Yeah, I appreciate all of that insight. I know listeners will love that. I have yet another segment, though, that maybe we could step into, a pathways one. And the aim here is to kind of show how people made their way into the profession. And in prepping for this talk, I mean, there's so many different pivotal moments in your career. It was tough to kind of zero in on just one. But I did settle in on an early one for you. I understand that you actually had aspirations of going into law and becoming a prosecutor, and then from there, possibly getting into politics. But all of that changed. There was something that altered the course. And maybe you could share that with listeners.
So I was raised to probably be a lawyer, a political figure, make a difference in the world. I was going to UC Berkeley. I went undergrad and law school, and I had a job as a dorm counselor in an undergrad dorm. And so they had a couple older students who would look over the dormitory, and they moved the freshman football team into the dorm. And one of the students was the quarterback on the team, Steve Bartkowski. And in 1975, he became the very first player selected overall in the NFL draft. And I was choosing between different job offers. I thought I'd probably go to work for the Alameda County District Attorney's Office, but Bartkowski asked me to represent him. And so there I was, brimming with legal experience, traveled after law school and never done anything. And now I have the first player picked in the NFL draft with an alternative football league competing called the World Football League. And I didn't know that I'd continue representing athletes, but when I saw the potential for them to really make a difference and thought there's got to be a better way to holistically help athletes, here we are 50 years later.
Yeah. And certainly been a lot of change within the sport. And I would venture to say as well, like a lot of it driven by yourself there. That kind of leads me into this next question is that in your career, you've been part of all these different changes, as I said. You'd mentioned one already in 1975 when you got going. Sports agency representation didn't really exist. You kind of changed that. You're also one of the first to use an athlete's platform to drive charitable causes, whether it has to do with the environment, helping disadvantaged youth, and quite possibly you're most famous for building athletes into these brands, like marketing brands themselves. So the question here that I'm driving at is like, what was it that was, I don't know, pushing you to kind of shake up the industry? Did you have aspirations of like carving out your own business and your own position within it all by doing so? Or was there something else?
So I saw early on that the internecine battle between labor versus management was just a sideshow. And to have newspapers filled with ugly player negotiations or ugly collective bargaining agreement wasn't helping build the brand. So I tried to look to the future and see what would it mean if these three network TV stations that were bidding on rights fees had to compete with hundreds of other stations and how that could explode the television market. And then the question became how stadiums could develop and whether or not they could have naming rights and could they have sponsorship and jumbo scoreboard. And then as you started to see the explosion in television, next came the development of multiple platforms of content supply. And so we needed to make sure that the brand of pro football or Major League Baseball or the NBA had more and more ancillary revenue opportunities and ways to experience the game, such as fantasy sports. Or could you create an NFL network or a Major League Baseball network? So I was always looking to the future, and I saw that this was all going to explode, but it needed television to do loss leader bidding to inject the sport with exponentially more revenue. So a team that made $2 million from a national TV contract back in 1976 last year made 200 million. And the new contract will take it up over $300 million per team per season. So that kind of explosion then led that way. And you could see where the key with me and an owner was to talk about how can we generate more revenue? I have the stars, you have the team. How can we together build more revenue so we're not worrying about contract negotiations? There's plenty for everyone.
Yeah. I'm curious about whether that initially was a major challenge, like where you kind of like brushed off several times. I mean, obviously you're speaking their language when it comes to increasing revenues. That's something that I'm sure every owner would have been interested in. But at the same time, like you're this young, sports agent who's, had some success in their career at that point, but you're really proposing massive changes to the way the industry had been run for years. I mean, that probably could have, been perceived several different ways, I guess, by people.
Well, ultimately, it's about franchise value. And what I told owners privately is if you want to explode the value of your franchise, we need to focus on all the revenue sources and ways that we can brand this sport. So it's not by chance that 130 million people watch the Super Bowl this year. That means that football is not only the most popular sport in America, it's the most popular television show. It's the most popular form of televised entertainment. So it wasn't helpful to spend our time savaging each other. What we needed to do was that. And the key to this was having the talent. So I started focusing on the quarterback position in football. And the franchise quarterback became the most critical player. So it helped that I had the highest paid stars. And on a team like the Dallas Cowboys or the Pittsburgh Steelers or the 49ers, I had a good chunk of their stars. So that creates a different relationship if you're representing their key marquee player.
Yeah, there it is. Which kind of leads me into another question here. Like, I'm sure listeners would love to hear about some of the challenges and rewards that maybe aren't on, or have top of mind awareness for those when they're considering being a sports agent. Some of the things like the intricacies of it. What would you say to that?
So we've gone to what are considered salary capped sports. So the big challenge when that conversion happened, and that's to limit the amount of money any team can pay its players overall or any individual player. So what was necessary behind the scenes was to break down that collective bargaining agreement and figure out new and creative ways to allow teams to put more talent into the same cap. It was new contract clauses. It was new ways of structuring money. It was taking a brand new system and figuring out how to use caponomics to make a difference. So it was studying behind the scenes. Anybody can use a methodology and solve a problem in a conventional way, but could we think outside the square and come up with ways to compensate players that fit under the cap and yet weren't being used that could allow them to pay more money? It was restructuring contracts. It was voidable years and void buyback and option clauses and everything. So it was being able to tell the team, give them advice on how they should use their salary cap. So that was not really seen by anyone, but it was the key to compensating big stars.
Yeah, yeah. And that's highly specialized knowledge. You could almost have like a degree just in that. Capology. Sounds like a university course. Capology 101. There we go. But I also understand that you have trainings that you give to individuals who are looking to become a sports agent, and you cover things, I'm sure, like negotiation. You get into topics we were just speaking of, the marketing side of things, even maybe crisis communications. I'm sure there's a lot that goes into it. Maybe you could outline just a few of those things that you do help others, understand or learn about when it comes to becoming a sports agent.
So again, the first thing we do in an agent academy, and I've done probably 30 of them across the country, is to help young people hone their listening skills and the ability to draw out somebody else. Because again, if you can put yourself in the heart and mind, that will help you recruiting, that will help you in contract negotiations, that will help you in every facet. And then the next thing is the art of recruiting, how you can make a presentation and sell a potential client. So we do a recruiting exercise where the students actually recruit a real football player and his family and have to pitch as agent group. Then we do a negotiation problem, which is half of the young people play general managers and half of them play player agents, and they negotiate over a set of terms and learn that skill. Then we show them how to create a website and how to brand and market, how to be more effective on LinkedIn and TikTok and Instagram and Twitter. And then we talk about how to do a charitable foundation and then damage control. So we actually give them an athlete who just got in trouble for some reason or another, and now they have to do a PR release to think about how to rehabilitate that player's reputation. So it covers all of that. And then how to set up a charitable foundation that attacks a cause the athlete believes in. So we try to get down to the real skill set that someone needs to be productive, because otherwise they teach you the general principles in school of things, but it doesn't prepare anybody to actually go out and recruit a client and negotiate for them and brand them and market them and set up a charitable foundation and the rest of it.
Yeah, yeah, I like that. I mean, there's something to be said for, the theory behind it and what, goes into it. But it's what you just explained there. I think some of those soft skills, like you led off your answer with, like just listening to people and letting that information that you're taking in shift your approach and your strategic way about, negotiating a contract or dealing with a crisis, for that player or setting up a charitable cause. It really stems from a lot of those other skills that might not necessarily align with some of the other programs that might be out there that are focusing just on the theory behind doing many of these things. So I like that. I like that insight there. I do have this other question here, and this is getting back to you in your personal life. Like obviously, your career kind of represents a lot, and I think to me at least, it's this wildly fantastical ride that would rival anything that any Hollywood script could really come up with. There's been so many multiple story arcs, some of the highest professional highs that anyone could imagine, and also some devastating lows along the way. And not to be forgotten, stories of redemption as well. Now, stripping all of that away, like I would love to hear what you think of your career to this point when you're looking back at it. Like, what does it come to mean to you and all that you've been part of?
Well, hopefully it is about athletes making a difference, and it's about their own journey and craft and enhancing what they're able to do. So we have athletes who own small parts of football teams. We have athletes who are hedge fund creators. We have athletes who this generation the owner, this generation equity. And so hopefully it's about athletic empowerment, but then it's also about trying to take on bullying and domestic violence and sex trafficking in the environment, and seeing what we can do to create programs for all of that. As you said, I've had a lot of highs. Then I started to struggle some years ago with alcohol, and I needed to focus on sobriety. And so now I'm just finished my 14th year of continuous sobriety. And that was a challenge. But what you come to at the end of life is it really is all about the quality of the relationships that you had. Were you a good father, a good son, a good brother? Were you good to your friends? Were you there for your friends at a time when it wasn't popular to be a friend? Were you there in crisis? And then did you give back? Did you try to cure pain and help people who can't help themselves? And really, all the newspaper clippings, all the glamour, everything fades, and you're left with those couple enduring qualities.
I love that. I love that insight there. And I think, thus far in this conversation, that's been coming across. And I don't think it's necessarily something that, you've been just realizing, in the last 5, 10 years or so. This is something that's been, as you'd mentioned already, that you were aware of early on. I mean, as I read off the top, I think over the course of your career, you've helped, donate, through the athletes you've represented over $750 million, right, to different charitable causes. So this is something that you were definitely keyed in on early within your career and has continued on to this point. And, again, in referencing this conversation, what you've shared is something that you certainly are still part of right now and engaged with. And it seems to be a driving force for, what you're doing within your career at this point.
So I think that how is this world going to be different because you are in it? How is it going to be better? How can you enhance the quality of life for people? What tangible difference can one make in the world? And so really at the end, it's not the amount of contracts, it's not the amount of money, it's not whatever external fame or profile there was. Did I use this time to enhance the lives of others?
Yeah, yeah. At the end of the day, that's what it comes down to. And the other thing, too, I'm just going to quickly add what I really appreciate about this is, again, I think for a lot of people, when they think of sports agency, money, 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 and that's it. But what you're saying here is you're flipping it all on its head, and coming from the godfather of sports agency, I would say, I'm sure many people would consider you to be that. I think it certainly carries weight, obviously, and I think it's a perspective that's needed. And yeah, just to make the world a better place, we need more of that. We need more Leigh Steinbergs in the industry and doing what you're doing. So yeah, I appreciate you sharing that. I do have this other segment here, a water cooler story segment, and this is one I've been really looking forward to here. I just ask guests to indulge listeners with a story related to their work. So I'd love to hear what you have for us today, Lee.
Oh gosh, so many. There was a quarterback named Ben Roethlisberger, and he was very superstitious. So they got to the playoffs, and they were going to play in Denver. So I asked him for tickets, and there was silence on the other end of the phone. And I said, "Is there a problem?" He said, "Well, you know I'm superstitious, and you came to the AFC Championship game last year, and we lost." I said, "Well, 70,000 other people there too." But I got this figured out. I said, "You mean there'll be no tickets if we show up at will call?" He said, "Well, you'll just be sitting in snow. It'll be a long way." Don't go to that game. They win. I go to the Super Bowl and they win. And we're on the bus driving back. And I said, "Ben, you just won the Super Bowl and I'm here." He said, "Yeah." And I said, "And so I guess I get to go to more Super Bowls." He said, "Yes, but never an AFC championship game."
There you go. There you go. I love that. Selfishly speaking here, again, being a fan of the sport, and in particular, you've referenced, the NFL. Yeah, I'm a massive Buffalo Bills fan. I know you represented some of the athletes there. I think Bruce Smith, maybe Thurman Thomas. Those are some of the players that I followed, quite a bit. Any stories there for Bills Mafia?
Oh, God, we had more fun. Bruce Smith never met a contract he liked after he signed it. So we just agreed to things. And then he was like, "Oh, I'm undersalaried." He signed the biggest contract ever. But Ralph Wilson and I were really good friends. And he used to send me footballs every Christmas. But it's always the agony and ecstasy. So Troy Aikman goes out in the Super Bowl and wins, and he's MVP, and that's joy. But on the other hand, we have Thurman Thomas and Bruce Smith who lost. So I thought Buffalo was a very special place in terms of the passion and love they have for football. And I had a quarterback there, Rob Johnson, who started for a couple of years. But the uniqueness and the unfairness is this. For 4 straight years, their team was one of the two best in the whole NFL. That's an impossible thing to do, 4 years in a row. But because they lost, instead of going down as one of the great teams of all time with Andre Reed and Cornelius Bennett and Berman and on, they go down as losers, which really is not the right way to look at it.
No, it isn't. And I think, to be honest, to be fair, over the last little while, though, I think that narrative is shifting now, where people are appreciating what you just outlined there, like how difficult that was. And I think there was even documentaries, like a 30 for 30, that was put out to cover that, because it hasn't been done since, right? And I think now people are finally understanding what a special team that was, and still the value in the amazing feat that was, to be honest.
So, it was a lot of fun. But I watched some games from Ralph Wilson's box, and when I unfroze, I really treasured the experience.
There you go. Well, I do have one last segment here that we're rounding the bend into. It's called the crystal ball segment. As the name implies, we're looking towards the future, trends, predictions, so on and so forth. And clearly the business of sport continues to evolve, and in particular, digital media, social media. And from the perspective of somebody like yourself within your industry, I'm sure that change was, something that was a welcome one. At the end of the day, it's a new variable that can add value to a player. And again, returning to this point of players becoming these brands, players can be enhancing their brand value. But on the flip side, if you're not careful, or, the player's not careful, they could also be devaluing themselves by doing something silly. So I'm curious about, your perspective on social media from your, vantage point within the profession. But then also, too, the second part of the question is, How do you see things evolving further, with sports representation?
I think again that it's television which has really revolutionized everything, and it's the number of games, it's the amount of backup shows, it's all the rest of it. But now you have all of this new way of information being transferred, which is all social media. And I think that this is going to continue. It's about star building. And so social media allows the ability for branding. Well, now you have NIL come in, and you have not only is the money being used for colleges to recruit players off of high school campuses, but players are starting at 14 or 15 years of age to put up websites and to put up logos and all the rest of it. So the positive is more athletic recognition, better branding. The negative is a loss of childhood. Me sitting on railroad tracks drinking a big bottle of Coke, thinking that was a fun thing to do, is now replaced by athletes pushing themselves to brand and be more popular and the rest of it. And you fear they're losing their childhood.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. I think that's something like there's been a lot of discussion about that, and like kids themselves only playing one sport, and dedicating themselves, like you said, at a young age to just that, and missing out on all these other opportunities along the way. It's kind of the underbelly, I guess, of the sport and how the industry is evolving. Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that. Well, I can't believe we've blown through this entire conversation here, Leigh. It's been an absolute pleasure. I feel like we've just got started, but I've got to say, a true pleasure, and I know listeners are really going to appreciate everything you shared. So thanks for joining the program.
My pleasure, and I hope it inspires a few young people out there.
Oh, without a doubt.
Now, for those interested in learning more about Leigh and his work, you can do so via LinkedIn, Instagram, X, and also on his personal website, steinbergspeaks.com. And for reference, all this information, including links, will be in the show notes. And hey, if you like today's show, please be sure to tell a friend and share. To show further support, you can always rate, review, and subscribe wherever you access your podcast. And lastly, as I mentioned off the top, head on over to YouTube. I do have a channel over there which hosts highlights from these audio recordings. And if you do make it over there, I would love that like or subscribe. And finally, don't forget to join us on the next episode of Life As A, where we'll continue to explore and unearth the details of professions and the people behind them. I'm your host, Christopher Schoenwald. Until next time, stay curious about life and living.